Revelation chapter 12, verse 11. They overcame the accuser by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. First of all, I just want to thank you very much for the kind and sincere invitation that was given to me to share with you. I have been excited to share my story of the past 20 years with you. Being on the Dungannon circuit was a significant 2 years for me. I moved away from home for the first time on the day of the total solar eclipse, the 11th of August, 1999, and left just before another 11th, September the 11th, 2001. It was a very good 2 years, being involved in all sorts of things, services, pastoral visiting, youth and children's work, and other connections. Your warmth and patience and encouragement enabled me to grow in my gifts during that time and challenged me to new things and enabled me to think through ministry in a setting different from what I had experienced all my life. While I thanked you for all of that in 2001, for what it moved me on to, I remain very thankful. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 17, it tells us that Jesus travelled along the border, and it was there that he met 10 men with infectious skin diseases, different backgrounds, united in marginalisation from the rest of society. To the one that thanked Jesus for his healing, Jesus said, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Now, I'm from the border, the product of a marriage from either side of the border. And as I mentioned, I've travelled over these past 20 years with many people from other borders and who've been shoved to the margins. And in it all, my purpose is that people would be made well in God, that they would know the goodness and love of God and hear and experience the gospel in its fullness. And I'll give an outline of maybe, first of all, where I've been since then. After that, I'll share some major themes of my life and ministry more broadly. 2001 to 2004, Edgehill College. Those were the years whenever Edgehill premises was being redeveloped. The first 2 years I lived at the Methodist Chaplaincy on Elmwood Avenue and attended lectures in Fisherwick Presbyterian Church halls. But then at my last year, we were back in the beautiful new Edgehill building. Now, as someone who didn't like school, I wasn't particularly excited about the academic aspect of those years, but it was my calling, and I did enjoy my time there very much. Now, the numbers of students overall was very small, and so that was limiting. 2004 to 2007. My first station was Glastrey and Portaferry on the Ards Peninsula in County Down. I loved it there. It almost seems to me to be the perfect circuit. Warm-hearted country people and plenty of opportunity. Glastrey Church had a great age spread with a packed church on a Sunday morning, people willing to be active and use their gifts, and they were encouragers. Portaferry, a small number and no young families, but energetic and supportive and very hospitable. I invited a youth team from Germany to participate in the community gala festival, and they ended up coming back every year since, up until my last year there, up until last year, I think. I was ordained in 2006. I will never forget the service and the church's affirmation of my ministry calling, knowing all about me, embracing me and entrusting me to this ministry. 2007 to 2011, having previously spent so much time helping with camps in Sligo run by my aunt and uncle back in my teens and early 20s, and being half Calvin, I had a heart for the South. So when the request came to move to the then Cavan and Longford circuit, I did. It was relatively close to home, but in many ways it was a difficult time. Again, wonderful people, but a spread out circuit with financial challenges and decline of numbers. And it was a time in my life when I was really struggling personally and considered leaving the ministry. But I thought I'd give one more circuit a try. 2011 to 16, Gorey, County Wexford, was exactly where I needed to be. One church, but with responsibility to explore new areas of mission. I found myself being the main clergy person in the largest school in the Republic of Ireland, and with great freedom and involvement there. We had a youth drop-in project and I got involved in lots of other things. I loved it. And I was very frustrated at having to move away from where I'd made so many close friendships. 2016 to 19. I wasn't able to stay south, so was reasonably content for a time to go back to a familiar place, Pettigo and Irvinstown. Yet years before, I had lots of connections with Pettigo through CE and had worked in a shop in Irvinstown. It was good to be in a setting I knew well and connect at that level, and good to be near my parents too, but I was keen to get back south. 2019 to present, the North Tipperary Circuit has 3 congregations, Clough-Jordan, Borrisacane, and Ross Cray, where I live. 4th church premises, Shinrone, as well. Small congregations, and yet positive, active in community, sincere and down to earth. I have space to explore potential connections and new work further south into Tipperary and maybe parts of surrounding counties. And this within a fast changed and changing Ireland. Only having 8 months of freedom here before being shut down has meant that it has been hard to feel socially connected with the local area, and it's been isolating and challenging. But I've managed, and we've got on with things. Now, with that overview, I want to mention maybe certain areas of things over the past 20 years. Kind of maybe youth work, let's say. Dungannon included 2 of the 7 years of when I was Young People's Convener for Irish CE, Christian Endeavour, organising and seeing real development of the youth events and camps for Irish CE. Those were exciting times, working with great friends. However, the structure of Irish CE couldn't move with the times, and so I couldn't facilitate meaning development of the youth work, and I left involvement in CE in 2006. Having said that, I got involved in connections with CE in Germany, and also bringing a team to at least 16 youth camps in Hungary and Romania over the years, until relatively recently. I always loved children's work and then youth work. And while in Dungannon, I organised circuit youth summer camps, as well as being involved in the local youth groups. Then jumping on a decade, I left Longford in my late 30s, thinking youth work was maybe behind me. I felt I couldn't connect with youth anymore. But many of the teenagers that I then met in my next circuit in Gorey had parents the same age as me. I turned 40 there. In particular, a lot of teenage boys who had no meaningful relationship with a father in their lives. And my role as someone a generation different was what was so needed to many. The relationships built up there continue. People from other ethnic backgrounds. While in Belfast at Edgehill, I bumped into some Muslim asylum seekers from the Middle East. I spent time with them, learning about them, helping them out, having meals together, having Bible studies and praying with them. I found them fascinating and open and challenging. Myself and others from different church backgrounds, learned that we were each supporting people from other places, other countries. And so we came together to share our experience, and a group developed that then became Embrace NI. In Glasgow Manse, I housed some Lithuanian men who had stones that were put through their windows down the road. One whose car broke down borrowed mine for a few weeks while I was in plaster after breaking my leg from a fall. I got to know them so well that years later, when they were back in Lithuania, I went to visit them there. Then in Longford, I had interactions with asylum seekers, dealing with intercultural issues and speaking for their rights. And then on the present circuit that I'm on, the rights and needs of asylum seekers have been a major issue here too. There has been opposition to us standing up for their rights, which thankfully was overcome. Since 2013, I've had the privilege of being the chairperson of the Southern Executive of the Council on Social Responsibility of the Methodist Church in Ireland. And race issues have been something we've constantly been speaking on. It's been such a privilege, and it's a role that I've in some ways had to grow into, and yet seeking to make the church's voice heard where it needs to be in society. How we treat the outsider speaks volumes about our faith. At family, my parents celebrated their golden wedding anniversary last year, and they're in good form. Shortly after I left Dungannon, I became an uncle for the first time. I now have 11 nieces and 1 nephew. I'm very blessed that there are those who I don't share genes with, but who have become family to me. It has been the greatest privilege of my life to have deep mentoring roles. In my love, I want to talk more, but in respect of others, on a public video, I can't. But I do feel very blessed indeed. More on my personal life. For years before I came to Dungannon, I was frustrated that I couldn't feel relaxed with girls. I asked some out on dates, including during my time in Dungannon. It was about the end of my time in Dungannon, and then when I was in Belfast, that I began to acknowledge that I simply was not attracted to girls, and also identified a bit that I had an attraction for other men. But this was unthinkable. I refused to acknowledge it. I fasted and prayed for this to go away, but it didn't. I reluctantly had to acknowledge that this was real. And then I realized that my reluctance was based on fear of others, and that I needed to love myself and look after myself. It was early in my time on my first circuit in Glasgow when loneliness forced me to stop destroying myself with denial and acknowledge that I was simply attracted to my own gender and not women. It troubled and shamed me a lot, and yet in being honest with myself and before God, I felt freedom. I knew I would be ordained at the end of my second year, but basically I didn't want to hide this. Being provided with excellent pastoral care, I was enabled to share about myself with the leadership of the church at the time. They listened with deep care, and we had thorough conversation about the position of the church. But I am thankful that the Methodist Church in Ireland took me as I was and ordained me. But the pain of being silent as a gay man who couldn't speak about it took a heavy toll on me, especially when I was in Longford. I was lonely. I was hearing all sorts of negative things in the wider general public and church and other circles, and it was hitting me hard. I felt shame. I couldn't imagine any way in which I could speak openly. I figured that if I did, I would destroy the church. I became depressed. And at one point, I sincerely prayed to God that with the least hurt possible to others, that he would take me from this world. Gorey provided a new setting, and new people who came around me and where I had the freedom to get on with being me. Eventually, the right setting, with very good, encouraging leaders around about me, came about where I was able to share my full story openly for the first time in Gorey 7 years ago. It was a very nervy time and yet very encouraging and exciting time too. Over the past 7 years, I have increasingly gained the confidence to share my story more openly and to challenge homophobia where I see it, because homophobia is very real and very destructive. The more I've been open, the more people have confidentially contacted me to tell me that they are gay, but they can't tell anyone about it. There are ordinary individuals everywhere, and particularly from within Northern Ireland, in fact, nearly all from within Northern Ireland. There are ordinary individuals everywhere going about their business, but living in fear and shame because of the reactions that they imagined they would get if they began articulating how they really felt. Meanwhile, they hear words spoken by their families or others in churches and society, and there's some bit of hope in them that dies as a result. They live with fear and shame, challenging mental health, loneliness, and unhealthy lives. Such fear is the opposite of what Christ intends for us. And yet, time and time again, in the conversations I have, it is church people who are using words and attitudes that condemn. A narrow judgmentalism that builds on mistranslations of 4 or 5 Bible verses, but in reality is based on our own misunderstandings and prejudices. Because this involves being judgmental and against what we see clearly in Christ in the Gospels, and because it clearly causes so much destruction to precious lives, I have no choice but to vigorously oppose it. Such attitudes lead to people not wanting to hear even simple testimony. Just because someone else's testimony is lived out in a different life from your own is no excuse to close your ears. In reality, those who do that are closing their ears from their relatives who may be gay, closing your ears to loved ones that may be hurting inside, closing your ears to the voice of Christ. Over the years, I've tried not to take personal offense at such offensive and insulting behavior, but I will speak out against homophobia, prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness because it affects so many others. As I hope I do with my own heart, we all need to examine our hearts humbly before God. I never wanted to believe that I had a same-sex attraction. I certainly didn't. I did everything imaginable to get rid of it. I nearly destroyed myself in the process. For years, I suffered in silence and fear at meetings where people said homophobic things and got away with it, and I could say nothing. I promised myself that if I ever reached the place where I'd have the courage to come out and articulate myself, that I would speak up on behalf of others who would then be suffering in silence. I thank God that He has been with me on that journey and given me the strength to speak out. I have messed up along the way, but God has been faithful to me, and I want to give God all the glory in this. And it is God who has led me to a place where I can help His voice of compassion be heard to all, straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. In all these things, in all my journeys, in all the places I've been since I left Dungannon 20 years ago, I can proclaim a verse and a truth that I learned when I was very young. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to his purpose. Thank you, and may God bless you. Amen.